فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hey everyone, assalamu alaikum. I'm Yunus Mirza and welcome to the Islamic Married Podcast. So for today, we want to continue talking about fathers. And as I mentioned before, my dad passed away a couple of weeks ago, and I'm processing and thinking about the idea of fathers. What is a father? What can a father do? And how does scripture in general present fathers? And when we think in the Islamic tradition about fathers, different things or ideas come up. And in the stereotypical image, I often show my class Aladdin, right? And Aladdin does represent this stereotypical father. As you recall, if you've seen the movie, the father, the sultan, he is someone who is a foreigner. He is someone who is short, has a big turban, stereotypical Arab features, and he is coercing his daughter Jasmine to marry Prince Ali. So there's an arranged marriage that's going on. And he's someone that doesn't seem very smart or intelligent or able to communicate effectively with his child. And this leads to a conflict. And eventually Jasmine wants to marry Aladdin and not Prince Ali. So as I have this image in our minds of this father who's kind of stern and unintelligent and coercive, I want to look into the Qur'an itself and see what are the various images of fathers. And even within the Qur'an, there is this conception of ar-rajal qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa, that the men are the protectors and maintainers of women. And there are different interpretations of this as well. So some translators interpret this as the husbands are the masters of women, that they are in charge of them, that women need to defer. Others say that this has to do with maintenance, that men are generally the breadwinners. They are the ones who provide for women and protect them. And others would even say that this is a general. So the Qur'an says ar-rijal, or men, are the protectors and maintainers over women. So it's not necessarily about a husband-wife relationship, but that men have this responsibility and be caretakers, not only for their children, but for their aunts and grandmothers and mothers and sisters as well. So obviously there's a lot of discussion over this and the idea of how this even fits within the seerah or the biography of the Prophet Muhammad. We know that Khadija was older than the Prophet Muhammad. She was his first wife and also a businesswoman. He actually worked for her. So there was this conception of women being businesswomen and also having money and providing, and how this fits in with the life of the Prophet Muhammad, where he has daughters and none of his male children go into adulthood. We have a child named Ibrahim who passes away early on, Qasim as well. So the Prophet Muhammad is known as a father of daughters, and particularly that of Fatima, who is seen as his closest daughter, and one where he mentions her a lot. There's this famous tradition where he goes to her and he whispers, and then she starts to cry, and then he whispers to her again, and she begins to laugh. And later on, after the Prophet Muhammad passed away, people went to her and said, "Hey, what was that conversation about?" And she said that he first told me that he's going to pass away soon, and then I cried, and then he said to me that you'll join me shortly afterwards, and then I began to smile and be happy. So when we look at the idea of fathers within the Qur'an, we see different conceptions, and one of them I like to speak about today is the wise father. So there is Yaqub, which we spoke about before, or Jacob. And Jacob is seen as the emotional father and the spiritual one. He's always giving spiritual advice to his children. He is telling his son Joseph, not to speak to his fellow sons about his dreams. But he's also someone who cries, and he has sadness. And he talks openly about his feelings. And as we discussed prior, he says, ashku bathi wa huzni ilallah, that I complain to God of my sadness and my grief. Now we look today at Luqman. And Luqman is a fascinating figure because he's not someone that has a strong equivalent in the biblical tradition. So there's been debates among Western scholarship and literature about who Luqman is. In the exegetical tradition, there is a discussion that he was someone that was black and African, and there isn't a clear prophet or prophetic figure that we find in the Bible that's equivalent to him. We also see that there is some discussion that there was a figure that was wise and even Socratic in his method, and this was found in Western traditions. It's not necessarily found in the Bible, but this is who this person is, Luqman. And in the beginning of the story, Qur'an introduces him and says that he was given wisdom. Qur'an says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنْ يَشْكُرَ لِلَّهِ. And it mentions that indeed we bless Luqman with wisdom, saying, be grateful to God, for whoever is grateful is only for their own good. وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. And whoever is ungrateful, then surely God is self-sufficient and praiseworthy. So there is this introduction to this figure, this father, that he is given wisdom, and this wisdom is for him to be grateful to God. And then being grateful is actually being grateful to oneself, and only benefits one's own humanity. And then we have this fascinating dialogue where he starts speaking to his son, and he says to his son, and he gives him an advice, يَعِذُهُ. And wa'adh in Arabic, even today, in Urdu and Persian, has this idea of admonishing, of giving someone suggestions and thoughts and ideas on how they can improve. And he says, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah inna shirka la dhulmun azim. So he says to his son, don't associate with God. Don't engage in polytheism. Rarely, polytheism is a injustice. It's something that is worst of all wrongs. This is a fascinating phrase because this is the first advice that he gives to his son. And he talks to him as his dear son. He says, Ya bunay. And in Arabic, this is seen as something that is a close and intimate connection. And he tells him that monotheism is the most important thing. We also see that after this verse, there are two verses that actually speak about the importance of being good to one's parents. And many Quranic commentators and modern scholars, they see this as not the words of Luqman himself, but they're inserted by the divine voice of the Qur'an about being good to your mother, to be grateful to your parents, and then also to do suhbah, or have good company with them, and follow the right path and return back only to your Lord in devotion. And then it continues where Luqman starts speaking to his child, and he says, Ya bunay, innaha intaku mithqala habbatin min khardalin. So then Luqman starts speaking to his child, and he uses once again the phrase, Ya bunay, oh my dear son. And he says, if a deed were the weight of a mustard seed, be it hidden in a rock or in the heavens, God would bring it forth. God is truly the most subtle and aware. So this is a fascinating analogy. So after he tells his child that not to worship anything but God, then he starts giving an analogy. And in this analogy, he tells him that if there was a weight of a mustard seed and it was hidden in a rock or anywhere in the heavens or earth, God would bring it forth, right? And he is Latif and he is Khabir. And this is a popular name in the Qur'an. If you go to the Arab world, people will sometimes say, Ya Latif, or the one who is kind and merciful. But oftentimes in the Qur'an, it means subtle. That God is subtle in his affairs. So even the small mustard seed that is found in this rock, that God has the ability to bring it out. So he's basically telling his child, don't think you can hide anything from God, right? This is something common. Children, they think that they can hide things from their parents, they can get away with things, that no one's watching. So here Luqman is telling his son that no, God is all aware and he is subtle, right? Even if you try to hide something under your bed or pillow, or even in your thoughts, God is aware of that and knows about it. And then he tells his son, Ya bunay, once again, and this is fascinating in this passage that we have so many times that he says, "Oh, my dear son." So this is the third time he speaks to his child, and then he says to keep up your prayer and command what is right and forbid what is wrong. Bear anything that happens to you steadfastly. These are things to be aspired to. So here, what's remarkable is the idea of ma'ruf. So it's not simply about monotheism or understanding God as being aware and subtle, but it's also a communal action, right? That you should worship God. But this is connected to the idea of being ma'ruf, the common good, or doing goodness in the earth, and preventing what is evil, and then being patient on what falls you. So what's remarkable here is the connection with prayer and the idea of doing good within a society and being patient. So there is many verses in the Qur'an that talk about this idea, inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wa munkar, that verily prayer prevents someone from engaging in indecency and immorality. So prayer is not something that's for your soul and your heart. It should have a communal impact. And then he continues and he tells his son, do not turn your nose up at people, nor walk about the place arrogantly, for God does not love arrogant or boastful people. In this particular verse, you see the idea of not turning your nose up against people and walking pridefully on the earth. And this is interesting that in the Qur'an, we see this idea of an analogy, of a metaphor. So it's not simply saying don't be arrogant, but it's connected to the idea of how you walk. So something basic and relatable that someone on this earth should walk in a modest and humble way. And they shouldn't turn their nose or their cheek against other people. And verily, God does not love those who are arrogant and boastful. So someone might say, hey, I'm not arrogant or I'm not boastful, but there is this sense of, all right, how do you conduct yourself? How do you compose yourself on this earth? Are you dressed in a particular way? Your demeanor is communicating something which you may not necessarily intend. So there is this connection between your inner belief and how it translates into your actions. Lastly, it says here, go moderate in pace and lower your voice, for the ugliest of voices is the braying of a donkey. So once again, there is a sense of moderation that Islam understands itself to be the religion of the middle, of the wusla, and someone should walk not in an arrogant way or too quickly or too fast, and they should also lower their voice, that they shouldn't be someone who is screaming, and they shouldn't have a high-pitched voice that of animals, particularly that of donkeys. So what we see here is this connection between the idea of adab or etiquette, and there's this large literature within Islamic tradition about your manners, how you should eat, how you should talk, how you should greet people entering into houses. And many of it stems from this verse and other verses in the Qur'an that speak not only about law or that of theology or even spirituality, but of manners and etiquette. What does it mean to be a good person, a person with good morals in manners? And here the Qur'an, particularly that of Luqman, is detailing that these are the things you should do to be understood as a good person. And the Qur'an talks about this idea that the Prophet Muhammad is on khuluqin azim, that he is someone that embodies all these morals and etiquette. So to conclude, we see here in these particular verses that first, Luqman as a father, he is teaching the idea of tawheed, of monotheism, of worshiping God. But then he moves and he speaks about other issues, such as prayer, being good to the community, fighting against injustice, and also the idea of patience. And then he gives specific examples regarding pride, that someone should not be arrogant or prideful, and that means they should not turn their nose up on people, and they should not walk in a way that's arrogant and demeaning. And lastly, the idea of moderation, that they should be moderate in their pace and lower their voice and not have a high-pitched voice that would annoy or hurt people's ears. So we see that Luqman, or this idea of a father, is of a teacher and a guide. So if we think of the stereotypical image of a father, that he is someone that is stern, he puts his foot down, he's the breadwinner. Also, we see in the Islamic tradition the stereotypes we find in film and literature, that the father is coercive and domineering and a potential terrorist. But here we see this idea as a father, as a teacher and guide, that they are a muallim or a muaddib, that they're teaching their son particular etiquettes and ways to live in the world. And lastly, this idea of manners, I think, is essential in the Islamic tradition. So oftentimes when you think about Islam, we think maybe about the 5 pillars, we even think about stories or law, but we don't always think about morals, right? How do you eat, right? How do you speak? How do you walk, right? These are all things that are important. And many Muslims, when they think about Islam, they don't think only about its theology or religious worship, but they also think of how they conduct themselves in the world that's pleasant and beautiful. So thanks once again for listening to the Islamic Mary podcast. I encourage you to order my book, The Islamic Mary, Maryam Through the Centuries. You can find the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I encourage you to review that book there if you get an opportunity. Also, subscribe to this podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We've seen an increased viewership, especially on YouTube. Many people are now posting their podcasts there and even doing audio and video podcasts. And I would encourage your friends, students, and colleagues to listen to this podcast. We have over 80 episodes, reaching almost 100 episodes of the Islamic Mary podcast, and you have a library of Quranic commentary, monologues, interviews, as well as discussions of biblical and Quranic prophets. You can review this podcast. I'm happy to see that we have several reviews already. Reviewing this podcast encourages other people to listen to it and to disseminate it among their friends and colleagues. And you can visit my website and join my newsletter to learn about my book tour on the Islamic Mary, as well as my research, blogs, and future publications. Thanks once again, and take care.